A woman, abandoned and pregnant, humiliated by the man who once vowed to love her. A billionaire, ruthless yet strangely protective, suddenly declares her unborn child as his own, on live television. Betrayal, scandal, and a love story born from ashes. What truth hides behind this shocking revelation? The bright lights of the studio cameras cut across the stage, bathing the polished floor in a glare that seemed to stretch for miles. It was supposed to be an ordinary business interview, a live broadcast about investments, philanthropy, and the future of innovation. Nobody watching expected the evening news to transform into the most explosive scandal of the year. But drama rarely announces itself politely. It arrives like a storm, tearing through reputations and leaving entire families trembling in its wake. And in the middle of that storm stood Claire Matthews, a young woman with trembling hands and a belly round with life. 7 months pregnant, she should have been preparing a nursery, folding baby clothes and dreaming about lullabies. Instead, she was standing in the studio audience, her heart pounding so loud she thought the microphones might pick it up. She had not come for glory or for revenge. She had come for recognition, for dignity, for the truth that had been stolen from her by the one man she once trusted more than anyone, her ex-husband. Just a year ago, Claire believed she had everything. She believed love was enough. She believed marriage was forever. Daniel Carter, her husband at the time, was tall, confident, and charming enough to convince her that her future lay in his hands. She had given him her trust, her devotion, and finally her body, carrying the child they had long dreamed of. Yet when the first signs of her pregnancy showed, Daniel changed. He grew distant, sharp with his words, impatient with her needs. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by an arrogance that chilled her. And then came the betrayal. It wasn't just that Daniel had taken up with another woman. It wasn't just that he paraded his mistress at social events where Claire used to stand proudly by his side. No, the real knife came when he looked Claire in the eye and told her, "That baby isn't mine. Don't expect me to raise another man's mistake." The words burned so deep she thought they might scar her soul. Claire had been faithful. She had loved Daniel with the kind of fierce loyalty that can only come from someone who has little else to hold on to. She was an orphan, raised without luxury, scraping by with part-time jobs to put herself through school. Daniel had promised her security, a home, a family. And yet, when she finally carried his child, he tossed her aside like trash, denying the baby's very existence. For weeks, Claire lived in quiet devastation. Her belly grew heavier, her steps slower, and her tears endless. Neighbors whispered, friends disappeared, and Daniel's mistress posted smiling photos of vacations and champagne on social media, mocking Claire's silence. She could have hidden forever. She could have accepted her exile. But fate had other plans. Because standing under the glare of those studio lights that night was someone else, a man who carried a very different kind of power. Alexander Graves. Billionaire, investor, philanthropist, and one of the most private men in America. Known for building an empire from scratch, he had the reputation of a ruthless negotiator in the boardroom and an enigmatic recluse outside of it. He rarely granted interviews, and when he did, he never strayed into personal matters. The world respected him, feared him, envied him. Nobody expected him to step off script. Nobody expected him to see Claire in the audience, to recognize her trembling form, and to pause mid-sentence as the cameras rolled. Claire didn't even know why she had come. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps desperation. The studio had given out free tickets for the live broadcast. She had almost thrown the invitation away. But something inside her whispered that she had to be there, that the truth she had been denied might finally find its way into the light. And when Alexander's piercing gray eyes swept across the crowd and locked onto hers, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in months: safety. The host rattled on about quarterly earnings, mergers, and charity initiatives, oblivious to the invisible thread stretching between Alexander and the pregnant woman in the third row. Claire lowered her gaze, embarrassed, but Alexander's attention did not waver. For a man used to moving markets with a word, this was different. His silence stretched, long enough that the host faltered, glancing nervously at him. Then Alexander leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady, deliberate, and carrying the weight of 1,000 boardrooms. "There is something I must say," he announced. The studio hushed instantly. Across the country, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, sensing the gravity of the moment. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She clutched her belly instinctively, as if shielding her unborn child from whatever storm was about to break. Alexander's gaze never left her. "That child," he said slowly, each word sharp as glass, "is my son." The studio erupted. Gasps, cries, shouts, chaos filled the air. The host stammered, struggling to regain control, but Alexander remained calm, his hand resting lightly on the table, his expression unshakable. And in that single moment, everything shifted. Claire's humiliation, Daniel's denial, the whispers of strangers, all of it was swallowed by a new truth that no one could have predicted. The richest man in the room had just claimed her child before the entire world. Claire's knees nearly buckled. She wanted to believe she had misheard. She wanted to believe it was a dream. But Alexander's eyes told her otherwise. They told her that the nightmare she had endured might finally be ending. The cameras zoomed in. The world waited for her reaction. Somewhere across town, Daniel Carter, smug with his mistress on his arm, surely watched the broadcast. He would hear those words. He would know that the baby he had denied was now being claimed by a man whose shadow stretched across the globe. Claire's lips trembled. Her hands shook. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to protect herself from yet another cruel twist of fate. But another voice, small but growing louder inside her, whispered that maybe, just maybe, her child's future had just been rewritten. What nobody knew, not yet, was why Alexander Graves had chosen this moment. What tied him to Claire? What secret lay buried beneath his declaration? The studio lights burned hotter. The audience buzzed with speculation. The host's face was pale with shock, and Claire Matthews, standing in the center of it all, felt the ground beneath her tilt, as though her entire life were being rewritten in real time. And then, as Alexander rose from his seat, the billionaire took a step toward her, his voice echoing across the stunned silence. "Claire, come here." When the billionaire's words echoed across the live studio, millions of people suddenly wanted to know who the trembling pregnant woman in the third row was. Headlines were already forming in the minds of journalists, viewers were texting friends in disbelief, and the producers in the control room were panicking about whether this was history being made or a scandal about to ruin careers. But for Claire Matthews, the noise around her blurred into nothing. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart and the relentless questions spinning in her mind. Why him? Why now? To understand Claire's shock, you have to understand who she is and the quiet, ordinary life she fought so hard to build. Claire was born 28 years ago in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. She grew up in a foster care system that rarely offered stability. Her earliest memories were of temporary homes, crowded bedrooms with squeaky bunk beds, and strangers telling her not to get too attached because nothing lasts forever. By the time she was 16, Claire had lived in 8 different houses. She never knew the warmth of parents who tucked her in, or the security of a family photo album filled with memories. What she did know was survival. How to smile politely, how to pack her belongings into a trash bag within 10 minutes, and how to make herself small enough to avoid becoming a burden. Yet, despite the instability, there was something resilient in her spirit. Teachers noticed it. She was the kind of student who stayed after class, who asked for extra worksheets, who quietly collected scholarships like stepping stones across a river. She dreamed of escaping, of finding something permanent, something that could never be taken away. At 19, she enrolled in community college, working nights as a waitress to cover tuition. Life wasn't glamorous, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made people underestimate how much pain she had endured. Her laugh was soft but genuine, her eyes gentle but often tired. She wasn't a woman anyone expected to set the world on fire, and maybe that was the point. Claire never wanted fame or power. She only wanted love. And then at 23, she met Daniel Carter. Daniel wasn't rich, not yet, but he had the slick confidence of a man who believed success was inevitable. He worked in sales at a real estate firm, and his smile was polished enough to sell a house in the rain. To Claire, who had never been adored, his attention felt intoxicating. He bought her flowers, held her hand in public, and whispered promises about forever. He told her he wanted stability too, that he wanted to build a family, a home, a life together. For a woman who had grown up tossed between strangers, those words were like sunlight after years of gray. Their romance was quick, a whirlwind. Within a year, they were married in a modest ceremony at a courthouse. Claire wore a simple white dress she found on sale, and Daniel promised that one day, when they were richer, he'd give her the grand wedding she deserved. She didn't mind. She was already happier than she'd ever been. For a while, their life seemed normal. They rented a small apartment, ate dinner on the couch, and laughed over old sitcoms. Claire found a job as an assistant at a local art gallery, while Daniel climbed the ladder at his firm. She supported his long nights, encouraged his ambition, and believed in him when he doubted himself. When she discovered she was pregnant, she thought it would be the final piece of their dream. She imagined Daniel's joy, the nursery they would paint together, the family dinners she had never known as a child. But dreams rarely match reality. At first, Daniel pretended to be excited. He told coworkers he was going to be a father, posted a blurry ultrasound photo online, and kissed Claire's belly with a practiced smile. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. He started complaining about money, about how Claire's modest salary wasn't enough, about how the baby would ruin their freedom. When morning sickness left her weak, he snapped that she was being dramatic. When she bought prenatal vitamins, he accused her of wasting money. The words escalated, the warmth faded, and then came the betrayal that shattered her. One night, Daniel returned home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. When she asked where he had been, his eyes hardened. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at her swollen belly and sneered, "Don't pin that on me. That baby isn't mine." The words felt like a physical blow. Claire collapsed into sobs, begging him to believe her, to remember their vows, their love. But Daniel had already decided she was disposable. Within weeks, he had moved out, flaunting his new girlfriend, the younger woman from his office who adored expensive champagne and designer dresses. Claire was left alone in the apartment, pregnant, broke, and drowning in humiliation. Still, she didn't give up. She found strength she didn't know she had. She continued working, carried her pregnancy with as much dignity as she could, and whispered to her unborn child that they would be okay, that they would survive together. She didn't need Daniel. But what she did need, what she longed for, was acknowledgement that her child was real, worthy, and not the shameful lie her ex-husband painted it to be. Which is why the studio moment with Alexander Graves hit her like a thunderclap. Claire had never met Alexander. She only knew of him the way everyone did, through headlines about billion-dollar deals, charity foundations, and whispers of ruthless negotiations. He was a man so distant from her world that he might as well have lived on another planet. And yet he had looked at her belly, and claimed her child as his own. It didn't make sense. It terrified her. And yet, deep inside, it also sparked something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Because if Daniel had stripped her of dignity, Alexander had just restored it in front of millions. The world, however, wasn't kind. Cameras zoomed in on her face, her trembling hands. Viewers were already speculating online. Who is she? Is the billionaire serious? Is she a gold digger? Claire knew her name would be everywhere by morning, twisted into headlines she couldn't control. She wanted to disappear, but she also knew she couldn't hide anymore. The baby inside her shifted, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. Whatever storm was coming, she had to face it for both of them. And as Alexander extended his hand on live television, inviting her forward, Claire realized this was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She could run from the cameras, or she could walk toward the most powerful man in the room and demand the truth the world suddenly believed belonged to her. Her next step would either save her or destroy her completely. The studio was never meant to hold this kind of tension. It was designed for polished interviews and rehearsed applause, not for revelations that would set the entire country buzzing. Rows of bright spotlights glared down on the stage, making the room feel hotter than it was. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the green room and the metallic tang of expensive equipment. Producers in headsets whispered frantically to one another behind glass walls, their voices rising with every second the billionaire went off script. This was the set of the Business Hour Live, one of the most watched financial talk shows on television. Typically, the program was a polite dance of economics, philanthropy, and stock predictions. Tonight, though, the atmosphere was more like a battlefield. Every camera lens seemed to tremble as it tried to capture Alexander Graves, the man known for never revealing more than he wanted, suddenly declaring a pregnant stranger's child as his own. For the audience, the evening had started routinely enough. They'd been ushered in, asked to clap when the applause sign flashed, and offered complimentary bottled water. Most of them were business students, interns, and curious professionals who had signed up weeks ago for the chance to see the elusive billionaire in person. They expected to take notes about investments, maybe post a photo on social media to show they'd been in the same room as one of the richest men alive. None of them expected to become witnesses to history. The host, Richard Hale, was a man who prided himself on control. With salt and pepper hair and a voice that could soothe or provoke depending on the segment, he had built a career on staying calm under pressure. Yet, now, his face was pale, his cue cards trembling slightly in his hands. He was watching his program spiral away from him, and there was nothing he could do. Every instinct told him to cut to commercial, but the rating spike flashing on the monitor in front of him made the producers hesitate. The numbers were skyrocketing. People weren't changing the channel, they were glued to the chaos. And then there was Claire. She sat in the third row, surrounded by strangers, her palms slick with sweat. The chair beneath her felt too small, the lights too harsh. She could feel eyes boring into her as whispers spread across the audience. Every camera angle now seemed to point in her direction. She had walked into this room anonymous. She was leaving infamous. The baby inside her shifted, a soft kick against her ribs, as if reminding her that she wasn't just one woman caught in a scandal. She was a mother carrying a future. That thought anchored her, kept her from fainting under the pressure. Alexander, meanwhile, stood at the center of it all. The billionaire was calm, composed, even as the world erupted around him. He had always thrived in environments where others panicked. In negotiations, he waited for competitors to lose their composure before striking. Tonight was no different, though the stakes were not money or contracts but something far more human, the claim of a child. The studio's decor seemed almost mocking in its ordinariness. Behind the stage was a large LED screen displaying graphs and stock tickers, a reminder of the financial world this show usually celebrated. The furniture was sleek but minimalist, black leather chairs, a polished glass table, a backdrop of skyscrapers projected on the wall. It was the perfect stage for corporate talk, not for personal confessions that would shake headlines for weeks. The contrast between the sterile setting and the raw human drama unfolding was almost unbearable. Every detail of the room, the gleam of the lights, the scratch of the microphone, the uneasy shuffle of audience members, seemed heightened. It was as though the universe had chosen the most unlikely stage for the most explosive truth. Outside, beyond the studio walls, New York City pulsed with its usual rhythm. Yellow taxis honked, street vendors sold pretzels, and pedestrians hurried home with no idea that a storm was brewing inside a television studio. In high-rise apartments, viewers who had casually tuned in during dinner dropped their forks, stunned. In bars, screens meant for sports were suddenly locked on the broadcast. Phones buzzed endlessly as social media exploded with clips of Alexander's words. And somewhere in an upscale penthouse, Daniel Carter, the man who had denied his pregnant ex-wife, was watching too. Wineglass in hand, mistress draped over his shoulder, he froze as his smug certainty cracked. The baby he had refused was being claimed by a man more powerful, more respected, more untouchable than he could ever hope to be. His world, built on arrogance and denial, was about to collapse. Back in the studio, chaos brewed behind the scenes. A young production assistant whispered urgently to the director, "Do we cut the feed? This wasn't in the script." The director, pale and sweating, shook his head. "No, we keep rolling. This is history. Don't you get it? This is bigger than anything we could have planned." The host cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "Mr. Graves," he began, his voice unsteady, "are you saying publicly that this woman's child is yours?" His words echoed through the speakers, leaving the entire room suspended in silence. Alexander's gaze didn't waver. His voice was steady, deep, commanding. "Yes," he said simply. "That child is my son." Gasps rippled through the audience again. Claire felt her stomach twist. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to know why a man she had never met was claiming her baby. Yet at the same time, she couldn't deny the strange wave of relief coursing through her. For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, someone powerful was standing beside her, not against her. The setting itself seemed to hold its breath. The lights hummed, the cameras whirred. The host's cue card slipped slightly in his hands. Every person in the room sensed they were witnessing the beginning of something far larger than themselves. Claire's knees trembled as Alexander extended his hand toward her. His voice carried across the stage, calm but commanding. "Claire," he said, "come join me." The audience turned as one to look at her. The whispers grew louder. She could feel judgment in every glance, some curious, some sympathetic, some cruel. Rising from her chair felt like walking into fire, but she knew she couldn't stay seated. This was her moment, whether she wanted it or not. Slowly she stood, her belly leading the way, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would drown out the world. The cameras swiveled, capturing every step she took down the aisle toward the stage. She felt naked under the lights, but also strangely strong. Every move forward was a refusal to let Daniel's denial define her any longer. And as she reached the stage, standing beside Alexander Graves with the entire nation watching, she realized her life had just crossed a line she could never step back over. Because the next words Alexander spoke would reveal why a billionaire had just claimed the child of a stranger as his own. While the cameras inside the studio captured every second of Alexander Graves's shocking declaration, across town, in a penthouse lined with glass and steel, another man sat frozen. Daniel Carter. The name had once rolled off Claire's tongue with tenderness, spoken with the kind of trust only a woman in love could give. Now, to the world, and soon even to himself, it would become synonymous with cowardice, betrayal, and regret. Daniel had been watching the live broadcast casually, half interested, while sipping from a glass of Bordeaux his mistress had chosen for the evening. She sat curled against him on the Italian leather sofa, scrolling through her phone, giggling at comments from admirers who praised her latest photo. They were supposed to be celebrating Daniel's upcoming promotion at his firm, his growing reputation in the city's real estate scene. He loved nights like these, when he could bask in admiration, when he could pretend the world bent to his ambition. But then he heard it. Alexander Graves's voice, calm, unshakable. "That child is my son." The wine glass slipped in Daniel's hand, red liquid spilling onto the pristine white rug. His mistress gasped, more at the stain than at the words. Daniel's pulse hammered, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He knew that child. He knew the woman in that studio, and he knew, beyond a shred of doubt, that Alexander's claim had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his life. Because Daniel Carter's greatest flaw wasn't just arrogance, it was underestimating people. He had underestimated Claire when he mocked her for not earning enough. He had underestimated her strength when he threw her out, certain she'd come crawling back. And now, he had underestimated fate itself. Because the woman he discarded was standing under the spotlight of national television while a billionaire claimed her child. To understand Daniel's venom, one has to peel back the layers of his ambition. He hadn't grown up poor. His parents owned a modest home in the suburbs. His father worked as an accountant, his mother a schoolteacher. They lived comfortably, though not extravagantly. But for Daniel, comfort was never enough. From the time he was a teenager, he was obsessed with appearances. He ironed his shirts twice before school, made sure his sneakers were spotless, and practiced his smile in the mirror until it gleamed like a salesman's promise. In college, he studied business, not because he loved numbers, but because he loved power. He was the type to charm professors with compliments, to join clubs not for passion but for networking. He talked endlessly about becoming someone important, about escaping the mediocrity he saw in his parents' modest lives. He wanted wealth, recognition, respect, the trappings of success that could silence the voice inside him whispering that he was ordinary. Meeting Claire had been convenient. At the time, she was gentle, unassuming, and deeply in love. She adored him in a way that stroked his ego. He told himself he was doing her a favor by marrying her, that she was lucky to have a man with his drive. He loved the way she looked at him as if he were a star she could reach for. But when the glow of new love faded, Daniel's true nature emerged. He grew restless. He wanted more money, more status, more admiration. Claire's quiet sacrifices didn't impress him. Her second-hand clothes embarrassed him. Her refusal to nag him about late nights made him feel entitled to even later ones. And when she became pregnant, instead of gratitude, he felt suffocated. The thought of diapers, doctor bills, and responsibility clashed with the glamorous life he envisioned. So he made the cruelest choice a man could make. He denied the baby. He looked his pregnant wife in the eye and said, "That child isn't mine." Not because he believed it, but because it was easier to bury her under lies than to face his own selfishness. In the weeks that followed, Daniel relished the freedom of his betrayal. He flaunted his mistress, paraded through expensive restaurants, bought suits that cost more than Claire's monthly salary. He convinced himself he had upgraded, that the world admired him more without the burden of a wife and unborn child. He told anyone who asked that Claire was unstable, that she had tried to trap him, that he was the real victim. And for a while people believed him, but arrogance is a fragile crown. Tonight, it toppled. On live television, in front of millions, Alexander Graves had undone the narrative Daniel built. The mistress gasped again, scrolling furiously through her phone. "Babe, they're all talking about her. Claire, your ex, she's trending, and oh my God, Alexander Graves? He said the baby is his?" Her voice dripped with disbelief, tinged with mockery. Daniel's hands shook as he grabbed the remote, turning the volume higher. There was Claire, timid but radiant, standing beside a man Daniel had once tried and failed to impress at a corporate event. Alexander Graves, a billionaire who could crush him with a single phone call, was now linked to the very woman Daniel had thrown away. It felt like humiliation poured over him in front of the entire world. He imagined the boardroom whispers, the mocking glances from colleagues, the disapproving stares from investors. He could already hear the phone calls he'd get tomorrow. "Daniel, isn't that your ex-wife? The one you said was crazy? Why is Alexander Graves calling her child his?" For Daniel, reputation was everything, and now it was slipping like sand through his fingers. His mistress tried to comfort him, draping herself over his arm, but Daniel shoved her away. He stormed toward the window, staring out at the glittering city skyline, his reflection fractured against the glass. Rage boiled inside him, not just at Alexander, but at Claire. How dare she rise from the ashes he had buried her in? How dare she stand on a stage that should have been his? Daniel's arrogance twisted into obsession. He couldn't allow this narrative to stand. If the world began to believe Alexander, if Claire's name became linked with power and dignity instead of shame, Daniel's own downfall would be sealed. He told himself he had to act. He had to reclaim control, no matter the cost. Because Daniel Carter wasn't just an ex-husband in denial anymore. He was a man cornered by his own lies, a man whose mask was slipping. And cornered men are dangerous. In that penthouse, as the city lights flickered below, Daniel clenched his fists and muttered a vow. "She'll regret this. Both of them will." What he didn't know was that his attempt at revenge would only push Claire closer to the one man powerful enough to protect her, and expose Daniel for what he truly was. By the time Claire reached the stage, the studio had transformed from a quiet business set into a storm of flashing lights, murmurs, and frantic whispers. The cameras, usually steady and predictable, now darted like hunting birds, capturing every flicker of expression on her face, every tremor in her hands. To the world watching at home, she was no longer anonymous. She was the woman at the center of the scandal now unfolding live. The host, Richard Hale, tried to steady the chaos. "Mr. Graves," he stammered, his voice struggling against the buzz of the crowd, "you've just made a claim that, well, it has stunned the nation. Are you saying, without hesitation, that this unborn child belongs to you?" Alexander Graves didn't hesitate. His voice cut through the noise with the kind of authority that could silence a boardroom. "Yes, he is my son, and I will protect him and his mother with everything I have." Gasps again. The audience could hardly process it. Viewers at home clutched their chests, texting friends with disbelief. "Are you seeing this?" Twitter hashtags ignited like wildfire. Billionaire baby, Claire Matthews, studio scandal. Within minutes, the clip was spreading across every social media platform. the moment etched permanently into internet history. Claire's knees wobbled. Protect him? Protect her? Why was this powerful man standing beside her? She wanted to ask 100 questions, but the host pressed on, smelling both danger and opportunity. Mr. Graves, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. This young woman, she isn't your wife. In fact, according to public records, she is the ex-wife of Daniel Carter. Are you suggesting? The audience erupted into whispers. Claire's name now had context. Daniel Carter's betrayal was already gossip in certain circles, but now it was national news, and the humiliation she had tried so hard to hide was being dragged under the world's harshest spotlight. Claire felt exposed, vulnerable. She clutched her belly protectively, eyes darting to the exit. Every instinct told her to flee. But Alexander's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. The weight of his presence was enough to keep her rooted. The host, sensing blood in the water, pushed harder. Miss Matthews, would you like to respond? Is what Mr. Graves is saying true? Is this child his? Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but the words stuck, tangled with fear and confusion. She shook her head slightly, tears threatening to spill. And then it happened. The moment that turned scandal into spectacle. A voice shouted from the audience, sharp and accusing, "She's lying! She's a gold digger!" Claire froze. The words cut her like a knife. Heads turned toward the source, a young man with a phone in his hand, recording every second. Others murmured agreement, emboldened by the accusation. In seconds, the room that had been shocked into silence began to fracture into judgment. Of course she wants his money. She trapped him. Why else would a billionaire claim her baby? Claire's vision blurred. Her face burned with shame. It was happening again. The same cruelty Daniel had shown her, now multiplied by hundreds of voices and broadcast across millions of screens. She wanted to scream that she had never asked for this, that she didn't even know why Alexander was doing this. But her body betrayed her, paralyzed by fear. Alexander, however, did not falter. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. He turned toward the audience, his voice calm but edged with steel. Enough. The single word carried such weight that the room stilled instantly. Even the accuser lowered his phone. Alexander stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the studio like a warning shot. You dare call her a liar? You dare insult the mother of my child while hiding in the shadows of a crowd? The accuser shrank back into his seat, silent. The atmosphere shifted. A mixture of awe and unease, but the damage was done. The whispers wouldn't stop at the studio doors. By the next morning, tabloids would run screaming headlines. Pregnant ex-wife exposed on live TV. Paparazzi would camp outside her apartment. Strangers would dig into her past, twisting every detail into gossip. And in the middle of it all, Daniel Carter watched from his penthouse, his smirk returning. Perfect, he muttered, swirling his wine. Let her drown in the scandal. Let Graves burn with her. He didn't realize that his own downfall had already been set in motion. Back in the studio, the host cleared his throat again, desperate to regain control. Mr. Graves, the public deserves clarity. How do you explain this? Are you admitting to an affair with Miss Matthews? Is this child the result of some secret relationship? Claire's heart stopped. The word affair stabbed her. This wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want to be painted as someone who betrayed, who schemed, who manipulated. Her child deserved better than to be branded a scandal before even taking his first breath. She shook her head, finally finding her voice. No, I don't know why he's saying this. Her words trembled, but they were true. The host seized on it like a predator. So you deny it? You're saying Mr. Graves is lying? Claire's eyes darted to Alexander. His expression was unreadable, his gaze steady. He leaned into the microphone, his tone final. No, she is simply afraid, but the truth cannot be denied. That child is mine, and anyone who dares question it will face me. The audience gasped again. Claire's legs wavered beneath her, but Alexander's hand held her upright. She felt like she was caught in a storm, and yet somehow sheltered at the same time. The scandal had officially erupted. By the time she returned home, there would be cameras outside her door. Her name would be trending worldwide. Her reputation, her dignity, her safety, all of it had been ripped open for the world to dissect. And yet, deep inside, a tiny flame flickered. For the first time since Daniel had abandoned her, someone powerful had stood beside her instead of against her. She didn't understand his motives, but she couldn't deny the relief that washed over her. Still, the fear remained. She knew the world could be crueler than any one man. And tonight, that cruelty was coming for her and her unborn child. What she didn't know was that this very scandal would unlock a secret Alexander had been carrying for years, and that revelation would change everything. The scandal didn't end when the cameras cut. If anything, it grew louder the moment the studio lights dimmed. Claire Matthews left through a side door that evening, escorted by 2 security guards who shielded her from the swarm of reporters outside. Flashes from cameras painted the night in blinding bursts of white, each one capturing her tears, her swollen belly, her trembling steps. Every photo was a headline waiting to happen. By the time she slipped into the back seat of a waiting car, Claire was no longer just a woman. She was a story, dissected by millions of strangers who didn't know her name the day before. The ride home felt endless. The car moved through New York's streets, past glowing billboards and bustling crowds. But Claire saw none of it. She sat pressed against the window, silent, her hands clutched protectively over her belly. The baby kicked once, a gentle reminder of life inside her, but it only made the ache in her chest heavier. Her phone buzzed endlessly in her purse. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. Former coworkers, distant friends, even foster siblings she hadn't heard from in years. All of them wanted to know if it was true. Some messages were sympathetic, others cruel. The internet had already chosen sides, branding her either a victim or a manipulator. By the time the car stopped outside her modest apartment building, Claire was shaking. The driver hesitated, glancing at the mob of reporters gathered at the front entrance. "Miss, maybe you should stay somewhere else tonight," he said softly. Claire swallowed hard. "This is my home." Her voice cracked on the last word. But when she stepped out, the crowd surged forward like a wave. Questions hurled at her from every direction. Is the billionaire really the father? Are you after his money? What does Daniel Carter have to say about this? She stumbled toward the door, blinded by lights, deafened by shouts. Her keys slipped from her shaking hands, clattering onto the sidewalk. For a moment she thought she might collapse right there. Finally, a neighbor pushed through the crowd, helping her inside. The door slammed shut, muting the chaos outside, but not the storm inside her chest. Once upstairs, Claire sank onto her couch, sobbing into her hands. The apartment felt smaller than ever, suffocating in its silence. Every corner reminded her of Daniel, of nights spent waiting for him to come home, of the arguments that left her in tears, of the moment he denied their child. She wanted to erase it all, but the walls seemed to mock her with memories. She curled into herself, rocking gently as if to comfort both her and the baby. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I'm so sorry." Sleep didn't come that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the audience's accusing faces, heard the word gold digger echoing in her ears. At dawn, she finally dragged herself into the bathroom. Her reflection startled her. Pale skin, red eyes, hair tangled from stress. She barely recognized herself. By mid-morning, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire claims pregnant stranger's baby. Who is Claire Matthews, from foster care to Fortune's spotlight? Ex-husband denies paternity, now what? Her picture was plastered across news sites, gossip blogs, and morning shows. Strangers debated her life as if it were entertainment. Some defended her, calling her brave. Others tore her apart, branding her manipulative, accusing her of trapping a billionaire. Claire shut her laptop, nausea rolling through her. She couldn't eat. She couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of judgment pressing down. That afternoon, the breaking point came. She had ventured into the hallway to pick up her mail when she heard them, 2 neighbors whispering just loud enough. "Did you see her on TV? What a mess." "She's probably just after the money. Poor baby." The words sliced through her. She rushed back into her apartment, slamming the door, pressing her back against it as sobs shook her body. She slid down to the floor, clutching her belly. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't." For hours, she sat in darkness, blinds drawn, ignoring the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Her body ached, her mind spiraled. She thought of running, disappearing into another city, another life, somewhere nobody knew her name. But even that dream collapsed when she realized the paparazzi would follow her anywhere. She was trapped. As night fell, exhaustion finally pulled her into restless sleep. Dreams blurred with memories. Daniel's sneer, the audience's whispers, Alexander's steady hand on her shoulder. She woke in the early hours, sweat dampening her forehead, her heart racing. For a moment she thought she was still on stage, the cameras flashing. But she wasn't. She was alone. And loneliness, more than anything, was what broke her. She curled into the corner of her couch, whispering to the baby inside her. "I don't know how to protect you. I don't know what to do. I'm scared." Her tears wet the fabric, soaking into the cushions. Hours passed. She barely noticed when the sun rose again, painting her walls gold. She felt like a ghost in her own life. Every knock at the door made her flinch. Every ring of her phone made her stomach twist. By the third day, she hadn't eaten more than a few crackers. Her body felt weak, her spirit weaker. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and whispered the truth she was afraid to admit. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. The thought terrified her more than anything. But despair has a way of convincing even the strongest hearts. And just when she thought she couldn't sink any lower, when she believed the world had completely abandoned her, a knock came at the door. Firm, steady. Not the frantic banging of reporters, but something different. She froze, holding her breath. Then a voice, deep and familiar, called through the door. "Claire, it's me. Open up." Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. It was Alexander Graves, and the words he was about to say would pull her out of the darkness, or drag her deeper into a storm she couldn't escape. The knock at the door echoed through Claire's apartment like a drumbeat. For a long moment she couldn't move. She sat frozen on the couch, her body weak from days of crying, her mind clouded with fear. She told herself she had imagined it, that her exhaustion had conjured the sound. But then it came again. Firm, steady, deliberate. "Claire, it's me. Open up." Her pulse quickened. She knew that voice. The same voice that had silenced an entire studio. The same voice that declared her child was his. Alexander Graves. Her first instinct was to stay hidden. She didn't want him to see her like this, hair tangled, eyes red, spirit broken. But something deeper pushed her forward. Curiosity, desperation, a flicker of hope she couldn't quite extinguish. Slowly she rose, padded to the door, and pressed her palm against the wood as if to steady herself. "Why are you here?" she whispered, though he couldn't hear. "Claire," he said again, gentler this time. "Please." Her fingers fumbled with the lock. The door creaked open, and there he stood. Tall, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, but with a softness in his eyes she had never seen in the cold photographs of business magazines. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander stepped inside. His gaze swept the small apartment, taking in the clutter, the drawn blinds, the untouched meals on the table. He said nothing, but Claire felt the weight of his silence, concern, judgment, maybe both. "I don't understand," she blurted, her voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this? Why did you say that on live television? You don't even know me." Alexander's jaw tightened. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare crack in his controlled demeanor. "Because," he said finally, "I do know you." The words stunned her. She stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" He sank into the armchair across from her, his posture straight but his eyes distant, as though he were weighing every word. When he spoke again, his voice was low, steady. "Years ago, before the world knew my name, I was just a man clawing his way out of poverty. My family had nothing, no connections, no safety net. My father died when I was 12. My mother worked herself to the bone, but some nights we went to bed hungry. I carried that shame with me. Every deal I made, every risk I took, it was all to bury that boy who never had enough." Claire listened, stunned. She had never imagined the billionaire's life beginning in hardship. He continued. "When I was 17, my mother got sick. I couldn't afford doctors, so I took any job I could, construction, deliveries, anything. I thought I was alone. But then one night, at a shelter where my mother was resting, I saw someone. A girl. She was younger than me, maybe 15. She had the same look in her eyes I carried, loneliness, fear, but also strength. She was sitting on a cot, clutching a worn backpack like it was her lifeline." Claire's breath caught, memories stirred, blurry, half forgotten, but real. She remembered that night. A boy with tired eyes had given her half of his sandwich, told her not to give up, that life could still change. She had never forgotten the kindness, though she had convinced herself it was a dream. That girl, Alexander said softly, meeting her gaze. Was you, Claire? Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. No, that can't. But it could. The memory was real. The kindness was real. I recognized you the moment I saw you in the studio, he admitted. I couldn't believe it. The girl who once reminded me not to give up was standing there, abandoned, accused, humiliated. I couldn't stay silent. I owed you more than that. Claire's knees weakened. She sank into the couch, overwhelmed. All this time she had believed Alexander's declaration was a mystery, maybe even a cruel trick. But now the truth unfolded. He wasn't a stranger. He was a ghost from her past, carrying gratitude and guilt in equal measure. But the child, she whispered. Why would you claim him? He isn't yours. Alexander's expression softened. No, biologically, he isn't. But blood isn't the only thing that makes a family, Claire. I know what it means to be denied, to grow up without protection. I will not stand by and watch your child suffer that fate. Not when I have the power to change it. Her tears fell freely now. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. People think I'm using you. They think I'm lying. His voice hardened. Let them think what they want. I've built empires on the doubts of others. I don't answer to gossip. I answer to truth. And the truth is, you're not alone anymore. The words struck deep, carving through the layers of pain Daniel had left. For so long, Claire had carried everything alone. Her childhood scars, her broken marriage, her pregnancy. Now, someone stood beside her. Someone powerful enough to silence the voices that tormented her. But with hope came fear. What about Daniel? She asked, her voice trembling. He'll never let this go. Alexander's eyes darkened. Then he'll learn what happens when a man tries to destroy what isn't his. Silence settled between them, heavy but protective. For the first time in months, Claire felt the smallest seed of safety taking root. Still, a question gnawed at her. Why now? Why risk everything for me? Alexander leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Because you once gave me hope when I had none. Because I refused to let your child grow up believing he is unwanted. And because, Claire, I don't believe in coincidences. We crossed paths again for a reason. Her heart raced. She wanted to believe in fate, in second chances, in miracles. But the scars of betrayal whispered caution. And yet, as she met Alexander's steady gaze, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't just a woman drowning in scandal anymore. She was part of a story bigger than herself, one tied to a billionaire's past, one that could rewrite her future. But she also knew that secrets, once revealed, come with consequences, and Alexander's past was about to collide with Daniel's rage in a way none of them could escape. For days after Alexander's revelation, Claire wrestled with disbelief. She replayed his words again and again, trying to grasp their meaning. He remembered her. He had seen her at her lowest point all those years ago, and now, when she thought she was broken beyond repair, he was standing beside her. But gratitude alone couldn't erase the fear. Every morning, when she opened her blinds, reporters still lingered outside. Strangers online debated her worth like she was a headline, not a human being. And somewhere across the city, Daniel was plotting his revenge. She wanted to crawl back into hiding, but Alexander wouldn't let her. One evening he arrived again, this time with purpose written in every step. He didn't come empty-handed. A sleek black car waited outside, and when Claire hesitated at the door, he said firmly, "Come with me. It's time." "Time for what?" she whispered, wary. "Time for the world to see who you really are," he replied. The drive took them through Manhattan's glittering streets until they stopped in front of a private building with glass walls that gleamed like a jewel. Inside, Claire found herself in a high-end studio. Stylists, designers, makeup artists waiting like soldiers ready for battle. She froze at the entrance, her instinct to retreat. "I can't. This isn't me." Alexander turned, his voice soft but unyielding. "It's not about becoming someone else, Claire. Claire, it's about showing the world the strength you've hidden. They want to see a victim. I want them to see a woman who refuses to be broken." Her throat tightened. She looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, and something in her shifted. She nodded. The transformation began slowly. Her hair, once tangled from nights of crying, was washed, brushed, and styled until it cascaded in soft waves. Her face, pale and tired, was touched with subtle makeup that highlighted her natural glow. The designer held out dresses, elegant but powerful. After some hesitation, she chose a deep navy gown that hugged her figure without hiding her pregnancy, a symbol that she would not be ashamed of the life growing inside her. As she stood before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the broken woman hiding in shadows. In her place stood someone poised, dignified, radiant. Her hands trembled, but her reflection whispered a truth she had forgotten. She was still strong. Alexander entered quietly, watching her. His gaze softened, pride flickering across his face. "There you are," he said simply. Her lips parted. "Do you really think this will change anything? They'll still judge me. They'll still call me names." "They will," he admitted, "but they'll also see you differently. You've been surviving, Claire. Now it's time to start living." The next day, Alexander arranged an appearance, not on a gossip show, but at a charity gala supporting single mothers, one of his long-standing initiatives. It was the perfect stage, one that would allow Claire to step forward not as a scandal, but as a woman with dignity. Walking into the grand ballroom was overwhelming. Chandeliers glittered overhead, crystal glasses clinked, and cameras flashed. For a moment, Claire faltered, her old fears returning, but Alexander's hand on her back steadied her. "You belong here," he whispered. And for the first time, she believed it. The crowd turned as they entered. Whispers rippled through the room, but this time, they weren't sharp daggers of judgment. They were astonished murmurs. Claire wasn't the tear-stained woman fleeing reporters anymore. She was luminous, composed, carrying herself with quiet grace. When Alexander introduced her to influential guests, he didn't hesitate. "This is Claire Matthews," he said with authority. "The strongest woman I know, the mother of my son." The words sent another wave through the crowd, but Claire no longer shrank from it. She lifted her chin, met their eyes, and smiled faintly. For once, she didn't feel ashamed of her story. She felt seen. Later, as she stood alone near the balcony, gazing out at the city lights, a woman approached her. She was older, dressed elegantly, and her eyes held warmth. "My dear," she said gently, "I was once where you are, alone, judged, afraid, but I survived, and so will you. Don't let them write your story for you." Tears pricked Claire's eyes, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from the recognition that she wasn't alone, that her struggle connected her to countless women before her. By the end of the night, something remarkable happened. Reporters didn't write about a scandal. They wrote about her strength, her poise, her transformation. Headlines shifted. "Claire Matthews stuns at gala. From scandal to strength, a mother's fight." Back in her apartment, she stood before the mirror once more. Her reflection was tired, but alive in a way it hadn't been in months. She touched her belly, whispering, "We're gonna be okay. I promise." But strength isn't just about appearances. It's about resolve. And as the days passed, Claire began to embrace a new mindset. She met with lawyers to prepare for whatever Daniel might throw at her. She spoke to charities Alexander introduced her to, finding purpose in helping other women. She started to dream, not of hiding, but of building a future where her child would grow up surrounded by love, not shame. And though whispers of doubt still followed her, she had discovered something more powerful: her voice. Still, in the shadows of the city, Daniel Carter seethed. Watching news clips of Claire's transformation, his fury only grew. She was supposed to be ruined, begging for his approval. Instead, she was rising higher than ever. This time, beside a man Daniel could never compete with. And so, with vengeance burning in his veins, Daniel made his move. What Claire didn't know was that her ex-husband was about to step back into her life publicly, and his next strike would be the most humiliating yet. For weeks, the world buzzed with Claire Matthews's transformation. Her appearance at the gala had changed the narrative. No longer just a scandal, she had become a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of a woman rising from betrayal. For the first time, Claire dared to imagine a future where her child's name wouldn't be tied to shame. But Daniel Carter couldn't stomach it. He had watched the news segments, seen the photographs of her glowing beside Alexander Graves. Every headline that praised her felt like a dagger to his pride. His colleagues whispered behind his back, investors pulled away, and his mistress abandoned him when the attention soured. His empire of lies was crumbling, and he blamed only two people: Claire and Alexander. And so Daniel planned his revenge. The opportunity came when he was invited to a prestigious business conference, one covered by dozens of media outlets. It was the kind of event Alexander was known to attend, the perfect stage to reclaim control, or so Daniel believed. He arrived polished, his smile rehearsed, his lies sharpened into weapons. Reporters swarmed him the moment he stepped inside. "Mr. Carter, do you have a comment on your ex-wife's sudden rise?" Daniel smirked. "Only that the truth has yet to be revealed. You'll all see soon enough." That evening, under the glittering chandeliers of the conference hall, Daniel waited until the cameras were rolling, until he had the world's attention. Then, with a microphone in hand, he struck. "My ex-wife," he announced, his tone dripping with mockery, "has been parading around as if she were some saint. But the truth is, she's nothing more than a liar. She tried to trap me with a child that isn't mine, and now she's tricked Alexander Graves into claiming it. She doesn't deserve your sympathy, she deserves your pity." Gasps echoed through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Daniel smiled, savoring the moment. He thought he had won. But he hadn't counted on Claire being there. Across the room, escorted by Alexander himself, Claire appeared. Her navy gown shimmered under the lights, her posture tall, her gaze unwavering. The crowd turned, whispers erupting. She walked forward, each step steady, until she stood only feet from her ex-husband. Daniel's smirk faltered. "Claire?" he sneered, trying to recover. "Here to beg for attention?" She didn't flinch. Her voice rang clear, strong. "No, I'm here to tell the truth." The room stilled. Cameras zoomed in. Claire's hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. "You denied our child," she said, her voice rising with emotion. "You looked me in the eye and told me he wasn't yours. Not because you believed it, but because you didn't want responsibility. You threw me out when I needed you most. And when the world turned its back on me, you laughed." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but she pressed on. "You wanted to humiliate me again tonight. But this time I won't stay silent. I won't let you paint me as a liar while you hide behind arrogance. I carried this child alone. I endured the whispers, the shame, the fear. But I survived. And now the world knows the truth, not because I begged for it, but because the truth cannot be silenced." The audience erupted into murmurs of support. Some clapped quietly, others nodded with sympathy. Daniel's face flushed. "She's manipulating you all," he snapped. "She's always been weak, always looking for someone to save her." Before Claire could respond, Alexander stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "You call her weak? Look at her. She stood here, facing the man who betrayed her, and spoke her truth. That is strength. Strength you'll never know, Daniel." Daniel's fury boiled over. "This isn't over," he spat. But Claire wasn't done. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "You're right," she said evenly. "It isn't over, because I have proof." Gasps swept the room again. Daniel's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Claire handed the envelope to the moderator. Inside were documents, records of Daniel's financial fraud, evidence she had gathered quietly with the help of Alexander's resources. The moderator read aloud, shock spreading across the crowd. This shows embezzlement, misuse of company funds, illegal transfers." Reporters leapt to their feet, shouting questions. Daniel's face drained of color. "Lies," he shouted, but the evidence was undeniable. Security guards began to close in, whispers of arrest filling the air. Claire's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "You wanted to destroy me, Daniel, but tonight you destroyed yourself." The crowd erupted, flashes of cameras, applause, shouts. Daniel struggled as guards escorted him out, his empire crumbling in front of the world. Claire stood tall, her hands resting gently on her belly. For the first time, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a survivor, a fighter. The woman who once cowered in the shadows had faced her past head-on and won. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "You did it." Claire turned to him, tears glistening but her smile steady. "No," she whispered. "We did." The conference hall roared with noise, but inside her chest there was peace. The past no longer defined her. The scandal no longer owned her. She had taken back her story. And yet, as the cameras broadcast her triumph across the world, one question lingered in everyone's mind. What would come next for Claire Matthews, the woman who rose from betrayal to victory? The night of Daniel's public downfall spread across the nation like wildfire. News outlets replayed the footage of his humiliation on loop. The image of Claire, standing tall with unwavering strength while he was dragged out in disgrace, became an instant symbol of justice. People who once doubted her began to speak her name with respect. Strangers reached out online to call her brave, mothers shared her story as inspiration, and young women whispered to themselves, "If she can rise, so can I." But for Claire, the victory wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. For the first time in months, she walked through the streets without lowering her gaze. Reporters still lingered, but their questions had changed. They no longer accused her of lies. Instead, they asked about her future. "What's next for you, Claire?" one called out as she entered her building. She smiled softly, her hand resting on her belly. "Raising my son, that's what's next." Behind closed doors, the reality sank in. She was free of Daniel's shadow, but her journey was only beginning. Motherhood loomed ahead, a daunting path filled with sleepless nights, sacrifices, and fears. Yet she didn't feel alone anymore. Alexander's presence was constant, not overwhelming but steady, like a lighthouse guiding her through stormy seas. Weeks later, as spring unfurled across the city, Claire went into labor. It was late at night when the contractions began, sharp and unrelenting. Panic threatened to consume her, but Alexander was there, rushing her to the hospital, his usually calm demeanor cracking with worry. Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. And then, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, her cries gave way to a different sound, the first cry of her son. The nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, and Claire's world shifted forever. She stared down at the infant, his tiny fists clenched, his chest rising with fragile breaths. Tears streamed down her face. "Hello, my love," she whispered. "I'm your mom, and I promise, you'll never be unwanted." Alexander stood nearby, his eyes misting, his usually composed face soft with awe. He leaned closer, his voice gentle. "He's perfect." Claire looked up at him, exhaustion and gratitude mingling in her gaze. "He's ours," she said quietly. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't realized how much she wanted to, but the truth slipped out. Alexander's hand brushed the baby's head tenderly. "Yes, he is ours." News of the baby's birth spread quickly. Cameras waited outside the hospital, but for once, Claire didn't care. She had something more important to focus on. She was no longer the broken woman crying in silence. She was a mother, holding the future in her arms. In the days that followed, Alexander ensured her privacy, shielding her from the press. But when they were ready, they chose to step forward together. It was another televised event, this time planned carefully. Claire, radiant though tired, sat beside Alexander, her son nestled in her arms. The host asked the question everyone wanted to know. "What does this moment mean to you?" Claire's voice trembled, but not with fear, with pride. "It means hope. It means that no matter how broken you feel, no matter how many people turn their backs on you, there is always a way forward. My son is proof that from pain can come life, from betrayal can come strength. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living for him." The audience applauded, some moved to tears. Alexander added, his tone steady and heartfelt, "This child is not defined by scandal. He is defined by love, and I will spend the rest of my life ensuring he knows that." The words sealed their bond in the eyes of the world. Headlines no longer spoke of scandal, but of redemption. From betrayal to family, Claire Matthews' new beginning. Months passed, and Claire embraced motherhood with resilience. There were sleepless nights, moments of exhaustion, times when doubt crept back in. But every time she held her son, she remembered the promise she made in that hospital room. He would never feel unwanted. And Alexander was true to his word. He was there for every doctor's visit, every late-night cry, every small milestone. Slowly, their bond deepened, not just as allies, but as something more. Claire found herself smiling more often, laughing at moments she never thought she'd enjoy again. She began to feel the warmth of love return, not as a fantasy, but as a reality. One summer evening, months after her son's birth, Alexander invited her to a quiet rooftop garden overlooking the city. As the sun set in fiery hues, he turned to her, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Claire, you once gave me hope when I had nothing. Now I want to give you something in return. A life where you and your son are never alone. A life where love and dignity aren't luxuries, they're the foundation." Her heart raced. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain this time, but from joy. She nodded, unable to speak. And in that moment, Surrounded by the city that once judged her, Claire Matthews finally stepped into her new life. Not as a victim, not as a scandal, but as a woman who had faced betrayal, risen from it, and found love stronger than anything that tried to break her. Her story had started with rejection, with a man who denied her child, but it ended with acceptance, with a man who claimed that child as his own before the world, and with a future built on resilience and love. Claire kissed her son's forehead that night, whispering, "We made it, and this is only the beginning." Because the truth was undeniable. Women are never as weak as the world wants them to believe. And Claire's journey was proof that from the ashes of betrayal can rise a life brighter than she ever imagined. So that's how Claire's story closes, my dear friends. You're still here with us until this very moment, aren't you? If you are, it means something inside this journey touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. Maybe it's a reminder that betrayal doesn't define us, or that love and dignity can be rebuilt no matter how broken we feel. The Stoics used to say, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And isn't that true? Claire thought her world had ended, yet she discovered strength she never knew she had. Just like Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so more hearts can heal together. Because maybe today, someone out there needs this reminder too.